You realize there is a mistake on the bid set, you should A, issue a change order, B, issue a constructive change directive, C, issue an addenda, D, issue a memo and log it in the design log. So the key piece of information here is that it's talking about you are in the middle of the process with the bid set. So the assumption here is that the bid set is at play, meaning you've gone through schematic design, design development, you've gone through the contract documents phase. You are now at a spot where you've put together all of the bid information. You might be also going into permit at this point. You might be doing the bid set first and then go to permit after that. But the idea here is that you have a package of information that you've put together for the contractors to bid on. So there is no GC yet. And if there's no GC, that means there's no contract with a GC. One of the bidders presumably will bid an amount that will make sense, and that the owner and you will help the owner to choose the bidder, and hopefully one of them will come back with an amount that makes sense, and you'll choose one, and they will become the GC, and they will eventually get a contract with the owner. But if you're in the midst of the bid set, that's not what's happening yet. If the bid set exists, that means it's been put together and has been given out to people to bid on. So, is it A, issue a change order? Well, what would you be changing if you issued a change order? You would be changing a contract. The change order is a change to the contract. So it changes the price or the scope or the schedule of the contract, or all three or two of the three or whatever. But it changes those three issues of a contract. Well, if we don't have a contract with a general contractor yet, it can't be A. So A is not possible because there's no contract yet. We're still in the bid phase of the process. How about B, issue a construction change directive? Well, a construction change directive is a really fascinating process. If you're in the middle of construction, let's say the contractor is in the middle of has just finished putting down the concrete for the foundations and is bringing in a bunch of steel to erect a frame, and some issue comes up where it turns out that there was a mistake on something, there was some problem, and there needs to be a change made. And the change is not that big a deal. It's probably about $1,000 change, something like that. And you create a change order with the contractor, and the contractor says, all right, instead of it being $1,000, I'm going to say, let's make that $50,000. And you're like, whoa, wait, that's way too much for this change. That doesn't make any sense. That we can't afford that. That's not reasonable. And the contractor says, well, I don't care. I'm just going to make it $50,000. Well, you're not going to sign that change order because that's not a reasonable number. And you would tell the owner, don't sign that. Like, we need to find a way to get this price down. So what would you do? Well, instead of issuing a change order, you would issue a construction change directive. And a construction change directive is essentially a change order that doesn't get signed. It's a change order where you say, look, I understand we don't agree on the price. We are going to bump the issue of this down the road, and we're going to start a process, depending on what contract type you have, either with mediation, with arbitration, or go straight into litigation to challenge this number. But in order to keep the project going, we're going to have you still do the work. And then whatever, if we do it through an arbitrator or something, and they say, really, 50,000, that's crazy. But 1,000, that was way too low too. How about 5,000? Well, okay, then the project is done by this point, and you pay the 5,000 instead of the 50,000 and instead of the 1,000. So it's a way of bumping the cost issue of a change order down the road, but keeping the project going. Because otherwise, if you're going to stop and wait for an arbitration process or litigation or anything like that, you might have everybody standing around for a year or two before that gets worked out. And that just doesn't make any sense. So in certain situations, pretty rare, it doesn't happen all that much, but in certain situations when the negotiations just aren't going anywhere, but you need to keep the project going, instead of a change order, you would do a construction change directive. But you've probably noticed it's essentially a change order system, which means that there has to be a contract. It means there has to be the GC and not just bidders. So that one also isn't the right answer. So what would you do? You would answer C, issue an addenda. An addenda happens all the time. You should essentially expect that if you produce a bid set, you're also going to be producing an addenda. An addenda is any change you notice, mistakes that come up, or questions that come back from the various bidders, and they put together, they have their own questions. You never answer directly to a bidder when they ask you a question. You put down a list of their questions and you make an exhaustive list of all the questions from all the bidders, and you put together an addenda, which is a list of those questions and the responses. But it doesn't have to be just questions. It could be mistakes you found, anything you're doing to change the bid set. And then when you issue that addenda, it actually becomes part of the bid set. So if you're talking about during the bidding phase and there's a change to be made, you're talking about addendas. And then D is kind of interesting, issue a memo and log it into the design log. That would probably also happen. It's just that that's a secondary issue to kind of keep track of any of the design issues and to keep potential litigation issues down the road at bay. So that's just something you would do with really any change that comes up, is just kind of keeping track of it. So it's got a date and all of that when that issue came up. But the one that's the key thing here is that bid sets have addendas. Once you have a contract, they have changes. They have change orders.